Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 168 of TowerGate, August the 20th, 2017, Sunday. Hopefully you guys are having a good weekend and you're ending your weekend well. Hopefully you're having a good Sunday. There's a main topic I want to focus on in today's video, which I mentioned yesterday at the end of the video, which is based on a video I watched by Dick Morris. So I'm going to get into that, but before I do, there's two other items I want to touch on. One, I just want to kind of propose a question. I know I've kind of picked up on this on some other YouTube channels and in some of the comment sections, and I think it's something worth being considered, and that is this. It's a question. Is there a purposeful distraction going on? Is there a purposeful distraction going on? And what I'm referring to is that it appears that just about the time that the whole Russian narrative went into free-fall collapse, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we started to see this happen, especially when Seymour Hersh came out and stated that Seth Rich, he knew for a fact that Seth Rich leaked some documents to WikiLeaks. And of course, this is following the VIPs, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, including Mr. William Binney, who was the architect of the NSA program, with them coming out and writing their letter. This is all following the forensicator doing his analysis of the Van file, showing and proving literally that the information that was given to WikiLeaks from DNC was an internal leak, not a hack. And then, of course, the follow-up with various people, skilled IT people coming up and following up, looking at the work of the forensicator and verifying that. So we had all this stuff kind of spill out in the last 2 to 3 weeks, and that really put a lot of pressure on the Russian narrative. And as it was just beginning to go into full collapse, still the main thing that they were harping on all the liberal media, the next thing that happens is we get a complete change of circumstances and narratives. And it all moves into this narrative now that Trump is somehow connected to the white nationalists, the KKK, ultra right-wing groups. He's a Nazi. He supports the Nazis. And then we have the focus now being put on the ultra-left versus ultra-right and the problems that are happening. And then we get this thing that happens in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is pretty obvious that there were some forces at work in that, some paid professionals, that appears to look a whole lot like a setup. So we get this whole situation happening, and it totally changes the narrative. So since that time, the whole Russian narrative, Trump-Russia collusion, you hear no talk of that now on MSNBC or CNN or New York Times. They're totally focused now on painting Trump as a nationalist or a white nationalist, an ultra-right winger, defends the KKK, defends what happened in Charlottesville, what have you, all this nonsense. So they've flipped the narrative. And isn't it convenient how just as the Russian narrative collapses, we get this new narrative supported by the violence that took place in Virginia? It just seems a little bit too perfect in timing. And it's actually kind of extraordinary that they go from Trump, connection, Russia, hacking the elections, Trump's a puppet or a lackey of Putin, this whole 9 yards. And then all of a sudden that's all just disappears, replaced by a completely new narrative that Trump's now, a supporter of, he's Hitler. He supports Hitler. He supports people who think like Hitler, people who worship Hitler, ultra-right wingers, nationalists, KKK. So the whole thing is flipped. So the Russian narrative ran out of gas, and so they needed a new vehicle to carry their hate message and to do more damage and to continue to try and destroy the Trump presidency. And of course, we know who the players are who are behind the scenes on all of this, and there's still a lot of questions about exactly what happened in Charlottesville. That has not been fully aired out. It is being investigated but clearly there was violent people on both sides, and it appears to me, just the way that whole thing went down, the fact that they didn't keep the two sides separate, not only that, they marched in force and herded one group right into the mouth of the other. We know that the leftist group, we know that they were advertising for people to come and join that protest. We saw that they were armed with a lot of weapons. We saw they were carrying the boards with the nails in them. We saw the bike locks, of course, which seems to be a favorite weapon of Antifa and these leftists. So anyway, the bottom line is that is there a purposeful distraction going on? Is this purely circumstantial, purely coincidence, that this narrative would shift and would go from one thing to another at the drop of a hat? Let's just say that I am suspicious. And it looks like to me, what it looks like to me is that the Russian narrative collapsed, and so they need something else that they can replace the Russian narrative with to get people to forget about it, because they don't want to talk about that anymore, because it looks like it is going the way of the Whigs. And more information will continue to come out as we're moving closer to getting to the truth about exactly what happened with the DNC hacks, leaks, whatever. The truth is finding its way to the surface, and that's why that narrative had to die and be replaced with another. Just my thoughts, just asking a question. The next thing I want to touch on is a story that's kind of getting a lot of play and now being picked up by a lot of different blog sites and some YouTubers. And it's a story that I think originally I kind of traced it back to Your Newswire, which is a site that I'm not a big fan of. Your Newswire does a lot of really salacious clickbait. They kind of latch on to anything and then follow it. They were one of the sites that jumped on this idea of the Trey Gowdy investigators being, killed or whatever back in Arkansas a couple months ago, earlier in the summer, which is a story I debunked like 24 hours after it popped up. I believe Your Newswire was one of those sites that was following that story and continuing to milk that story even though it had been debunked weeks earlier. And I looked at Your Newswire, and the story does appear there. I looked at the date. It appears to be the earliest date of any of the stories. But they cite in their story another site, which is some sort of a conservative site. I'm not too familiar with them. I went and looked at their site, and it's like the American Conservative or Conservative American or something like that. So it's not a site I was familiar with, but that appears to be the source of the original story. And the story that is now being picked up and carried by a lot of people, which I'm not sure is true or not, but it's certainly interesting enough to talk about, to comment on, is the story is that there were 6 Republicans who were bribed by Clinton to participate in the campaign to destroy Trump. And they're citing WikiLeaks as being the source of this. Now, I went to WikiLeaks and looked, and I don't see this story anywhere on WikiLeaks. But Your Newswire is citing this American conservative site, and I believe it's this American conservative site that did the original story, and they're the ones stating that this was on a WikiLeaks story. But if you go to WikiLeaks website, this story is not anywhere. Assange hasn't retweeted it or anything like that. So I'm a little skeptical of the story, but it's pretty interesting because there's some things going on that would support this. So some of those things are that apparently what's being reported is that these 6 Republicans were bribed by Clinton to participate in the campaign to destroy Trump. Now they're stating that these following individuals were participants, Republicans: Paul Ryan, Carly Fiorina, John Kasich, Lindsey Graham, and John McCain. Now, again, even without this story, you could easily make the case that Paul Ryan, certainly Kasich, obviously, Lindsey Graham, and John McCain certainly are and appear to be no friends of Trump and have certainly been working against him. So, I mean, there's certainly, I don't know much about Carly Fiorina since the presidential campaign. I haven't really heard much about her, but apparently she's also a part of this. So you can certainly make the argument that there's, even if you have no evidence, otherwise just what we see on the surface of what these individuals have been saying and doing since Trump was elected, you could certainly understand why someone would, create this story, whether or not it's actually from WikiLeaks or whether it's just someone pulling it out of thin air. There's some legitimacy to the accusation. But it appears that they're going one step farther, and they're citing, again, I could not find this on WikiLeaks. I would love to have found it, but I really could not. But this site is suggesting that WikiLeaks has based their story on emails in which there's email conversations going on between Huma Abedin and John Podesta, where they are discussing the divesting of Clinton campaign funds to various Republicans who were secretly on the Clinton payroll, and that the money was being moved between super PACs. So the article suggesting that WikiLeaks is stating that they have emails where they have conversations between Abedin and Podesta where they're talking about, the fact that they need to move some of this money to these 6 Republicans who they've paid to, or bribed, however you want to look at it, to go after Trump. Now they cite some other evidence, which is that they say that right after John McCain came out and made some negative statements about Donald Trump, that he received 2 large donations, which came from a Hillary Clinton PAC to one of John McCain's fundraising organizations, one of his super PACs. So this transfer of money after Magoo made these comments is another piece of evidence that they're using. Of course, Magoo's been making nothing but negative comments, and I would suggest that his going and fetching that dossier would have a lot more to do with it. I wonder if he received a big campaign contribution after fetching that dossier from Christopher Steele. And they're also saying that Magoo promised, or Magoo and Lindsey Graham were both promised, and again, this is based on some emails, which I cannot find, but they're citing emails being the source, email conversation, that John McCain and Lindsey Graham were told in some email conversation that also, by helping out Hillary Rodham Clinton and attacking Trump, that they would not, either of these guys would not face a serious Democratic challenger in their next re-election. So this story, this is basically what the story is built around, of the 6 Republicans being bribed by Clinton to help take down Trump. Again, being attributed to WikiLeaks, although I can't really find the story. There's a lot of things here that add up and do make some sense, and certainly are worth mentioning, certainly worth pondering as to whether or not this could be true. And of course, I wouldn't put anything past the Clintons, their campaign, or anything else. So certainly, if you ask the question, would this be something that the Clintons or the Clinton campaign would have done? Enlist Republicans who are anti-Trump to assist in the effort to take down Trump, and in helping to do so would be rewarded with financial contributions to their PACs, and also would be promised that they wouldn't be seriously competed against by Democrats when they run in their next election. So yeah, there's some stuff going on here that adds up, and some stuff that could be legitimate, but I'm still not 100% sure that the original source, WikiLeaks, is legitimate. And of course, I'm always skeptical of anything I pick up off of your newswire. So I thought I would put that out there because a lot of you are probably reading this, maybe seeing some other YouTubers commenting on it. So I just thought I'd get my 2 cents in there, and possibly it's true, maybe not. We'll have to see. But regardless of, even if none of this is true, about the being WikiLeaks being the source and these emails existing, there's absolutely no doubt that Paul Ryan, we know that Paul Ryan, when Trump was campaigning and he was coming up to Wisconsin, we know that Paul Ryan canceled a speech where he was supposed to give a speech with Donald Trump, and he canceled that speech. We know that, of course, John Kasich has been a hardcore anti-Trumper, and is even a lot of people talking about now that he's considering challenging Trump in a primary in 2020. We also know Lindsey Graham and John McCain, of course, how they feel about Trump, particularly, especially Senator Magoo, probably much more so than even Lindsey Graham, because Lindsey Graham has, on a couple of occasions, defended Trump whenever Trump's talking about going after ISIS or North Korea or whatever, because, of course, Lindsey Graham's a neocon, and anytime Trump supports any type of military action or anything like that, Lindsey Graham is going to be right there to cheerlead him on. But at the same time, he does take swipes at him. And the case with Senator Magoo is it's everything. There's absolutely nothing that that Trump says or does that John Magoo will support him on. So, there could be something to this. I don't know. But even if there's not, these individuals that are named certainly are anti-Trumpers and are people that we should certainly vote out if we can, or if they're not in office now. If they attempt to run against Trump or run against anybody, we should certainly not support these people. They're all bad players. The only one in the mix there is Carly Fiorina. I don't really know what's going on with her, but she's probably in that group, I would say. So anyway, that's pretty much what's going on there. Now, the main topic of today's video is based on a video I watched a couple of days ago with Dick Morris. Now, for those of you who don't know, Dick Morris basically is a political strategist. He became really a household name back in '94 after Bill Clinton and the Democrats suffered their devastating loss in Bill Clinton's first midterm elections when they lost both houses of Congress, which they had held for over 40 years. And Clinton's approval ratings dropped and various other things that had happened. And so Bill Clinton was very concerned about what was going to happen in 2 years. He was pretty sure that if things continued on the same course, he was certainly not going to be reelected. And he had surrounded himself with a bunch of yes men and a bunch of lefties and friends of his wife and various people. And so he was told that what he needed to do was get someone with some differing opinions around him, maybe a strategist from the other side, so that he could get both sides of these arguments, so that he could modify his situation so that he could win re-election and stop the bleeding, essentially, because it was a disastrous event for the Democrats and for Bill Clinton in that first midterm to lose both houses of Congress in such an alarming fashion, and to see his approval ratings drop and all this type of thing. So what he did is he turned to Dick Morris, who had been known as a Republican strategist, although he had worked on Democrats' campaigns as well. He was a political strategist. If you paid Dick Morris, it was his profession to help you win, Republican or Democrat, whoever paid him, that's who he went to work for, and that's who he would help win. But his own personal views were that he was a Republican. So Bill Clinton brings in Dick Morris. And of course, Dick Morris explains to Clinton, people see you as you campaigned as a centrist, but a lot of things you campaigned on, you've gone back on the middle class tax cut, you've weakened on this and this and this, you campaigned here, but now you went way to the left, you've probably been pushed there by all these people around you. Of course, he had a lot of scandals going on around him as well. And of course, one of the biggest disasters was that he had put Hillary in charge of coming up with a new healthcare system, and she put together a secret commission that met behind closed doors, and this was probably the biggest reason, certainly one of the major reasons why the earthquake happened. And so Dick Morris told Bill Clinton, hey, clearly the American people supported the Republicans big time on this contract with America, those 10 items that Gingrich came up with, including, dealing with things like a real middle-class tax cut, trade issues, and various other things. So Morris said, hey, you need to, you're going to be advised by your leftist friends to fight him on every one of them points, but what you need to do, particularly on welfare reform and some of these other things that are popular, you need to work with Gingrich and the Congress. You need to sign this legislation. So Bill Clinton ended up signing about 7 out of 10 of those items on the contract with America, and it did rescue his poll ratings. And he ended up getting reelected. But probably the most important thing that Dick Morris told Bill Clinton was, he said, hey, I know you don't want to hear this, but the fact of the matter is, it's not so much you that people don't like you. Actually, you're pretty well liked. You do have to sign on to the middle class tax cut. You campaigned on it. You went back on it. You need to make that happen. The welfare reform is popular. You need to sign on to that. A couple of these other things. But most important, and what's really getting you as far as people not liking you so much, is not you. Morris told Clinton, he said, it's your wife, Hillary. Hillary, her ratings as far as how people like you or like her, they like you pretty much, but they don't like your wife. Your wife is very, very, very unpopular. And my recommendation to you, Mr. President, is that you put Hillary in the closet in this secret health care commission that she's headed up. Get her out of the spotlight. Get her out of the White House. Put her in the closet. Put her in the kitchen baking cookies. Put her back into more of the traditional First Lady role, and take her out of your deal there. Otherwise, you will probably not be reelected because your wife is very, very unpopular. So Bill Clinton took Dick Morris's advice. He put Hillary in the closet. He signed on to most of the contract with America, and he was reelected pretty easily. So this is what really brought Dick Morris into the mainstream as a person that we all knew. At that point, nobody really knew about Dick Morris unless you were some sort of a political insider. But this really made him a household name, is the fact that he was credited for turning around Clinton's administration and allowing him to be reelected. So this is where Dick Morris gained his fortune and fame, I guess you would say. Since then, the last few years, although he still is a political strategist and he works on campaigns not just in the U.S. but around the world, I think he recently worked on 2 political campaigns, one in Spain and one somewhere else in Europe. So he's kind of an international political strategist, and he's a pretty smart guy, and he's a good political strategist. But he's been doing a lot of writing books, and now he's got a website, and he's on web TV or whatever. So he's kind of become more of his own media person and less of a strategist recently. But I watched a video that he did, and he was talking about the Russian narrative collapsing and all that, which we're all aware of. But he said something else when he was talking about bringing Seth Rich into the equation, and it's something that I think maybe we're all aware of, but has never really been focused on the way Morris focused on it. And it just really, it kind of really caught me. The light bulb really went on when I heard what he was talking about. And it's pretty much this. He's talking about who would most likely, if he's making the point that if the Russian narrative is now collapsed and there's overwhelming evidence that the information that came out of the DNC was not hacked but rather leaked by someone on the inside, then who would that person be? And Morris is making the argument that it most likely would have been Seth Rich, which I think most of us could agree on. But he points out one little thing that has kind of gone over a lot of people's head, which I think is really significant. And he points out actually a few things, but the main thing he points out, and I'll cover the other two in just a second, but the main thing that he points out is that if you look at the emails that were leaked, what are the emails about? This is very important, and it's great that he focused on this, because if you look at what those emails that were so damaging to the Clinton campaign, if you look at what those emails were about, they were almost completely about the conversations between people in Hillary's campaign team and the DNC and the media all be involved, colluding together to sabotage Bernie Sanders. Almost all the information that was released in these emails is about how to take down Bernie Sanders, how to silence Bernie Sanders, how to attack Bernie Sanders, how to put questions in people's mind about Bernie Sanders, him being an atheist, not really a Jew, but being an atheist, his supporters being radical, this and all these other things. Of course, we know about the conversations between journalists and the Clinton campaign and the DNC, asking permission about what articles to publish, asking the Clinton campaign to literally give them the talking points so that they could write the articles, and all the stuff that was really against Bernie Sanders. That's what most of the emails that were destructive to Hillary Clinton that were released to WikiLeaks were about. They were almost all about the going after of Bernie Sanders, which was the major issue that Seth Rich had. We know that he had a heated, at least one heated conversation with Donna Brazile, his boss. We know he was a hardcore Bernie Sanders supporter, a progressive. So if you're Seth Rich and you're wanting to even the score, you would want to release emails that would show what was really bothering Seth Rich was that he was seeing that these things were going on and he wanted them to become public. He wanted people to know, even though most people knew who were watching that campaign just by observing that there was something going on, that they were obviously targeting the media, obviously the Clinton campaign, but you saw the media and the DNC, who are supposed to be independent, fair players. They're not supposed to be taking sides, but it was obvious to anyone paying attention that the media and the DNC were on the side of Hillary Clinton, doing everything they could to promote her and diminish Bernie Sanders. So this is what Seth Rich was seeing. And so what he wanted to do, I believe, and as Dick Morris is making the point, is he wanted to bring to light and shine the light of truth on what was really going on. It was one thing to see it and just assume it, but it was another thing to have the physical evidence. And Seth Rich, of course, was someone who would have been in the position to see the physical evidence from the email conversations. He would have been the person who could have and was in position. He had the ability, he had the motive, and the opportunity to act on this and put this information out there to get it to WikiLeaks so that he could have proof of this collusion between the Hillary Clinton campaign. So the most important thing in question to focus on with these emails is, what were those emails about? They were about the campaign going on between and the collusion going on between the Clinton campaign, the DNC, and the media to take down Bernie Sanders or to sabotage his campaign. This is what the emails were about. And that tells you a lot. Now let's just take the Russian narrative, as Mr. Morris points out two other points that he makes. He says that the CIA station chief, the United States CIA station chief, said that he wasn't aware of any Russian collusion from either side. In other words, he as being the station chief, certainly would have known if there was something like that going on, and he was not aware of it going on underneath his nose. He also was not being told this by anyone at the CIA back in the U.S., calling him on the phone or sending someone up to Russia to talk to him and say, hey, we think this thing's going on. According to Dick Morris, the CIA station chief there in Russia for the United States had no knowledge whatsoever of any Russian collusion or Russia hacking into the DNC. He also mentions a Russian intel agent who apparently the CIA station chief had communications with. He too, even the Russian intelligence officer, I guess bureau chief in Russia, in Moscow or wherever, even he, the Russian intelligence head, wasn't aware of any type of hacking into the DNC or anything like that. And in fact, his point that he makes is that as an intelligence officer, he looks at the DNC and says, well, why would our intelligence agency be interested in hacking the DNC? What is there of intelligence value at the DNC? What's going on at the DNC is an election campaign, and that's all inside political baseball going on in an American election. It's not the type of thing that the Russians are interested in. They're interested in hacking into the DOD, the Pentagon, the CIA, and various other things. there's really very little, according to this Russian, if anything, according to this Russian intelligence official, that would have been of intelligence value to the Russians. They wouldn't really have cared much about anything going on with the DNC. That's small ball compared to what they're involved in and what they're really interested in. So this is also a very good point. It tells you that really the Russians, the motive for the Russians to hack into the DNC, there wasn't much motive there for them to do it. Other than if you want to say that that would help take down Hillary. But at that point in the election, it looked like Hillary was going to win by a huge landslide and that Trump had no chance. And we don't even know at this point who the Russians preferred. You can't just say that all Russians preferred Trump. Maybe Putin liked some things that Trump said, but he did pretty well under Clinton, the Secretary of State at the UN. And clearly, she helped him with that Uranium One deal. Clearly, the Clintons are very connected to a lot of powerful Russians and oligarchs and bankers. And I don't really think when you look at it, as far as Putin's concerned, he says, look, whoever wins, we're going to have to deal with either of them. And at least Hillary Clinton is someone we knew, the devil we knew. Trump was the devil we didn't know, probably a bigger risk for Trump. And of course, Putin suggests the idea that Russia could even affect the election was ridiculous. So anyway, Morris makes a very, very good point that the incentive, the motive for the types of information that was in those emails, the motive would have been much greater for Seth Rich to release those emails, to leak those emails, than it would have been for the Russians to even consider hacking into the DNC with all the other things that their intelligence agencies are interested in, what's going on in Syria, what's going on against ISIS or Afghanistan, sanctions, the EU, missiles in Poland, our association in dealings with Turkey and Erdogan. These are all things that would have been high priority things for Russian intel people to be focusing on. The inner workings and inner goings on at the DNC during the election campaign would have been of very little value, intelligence value to the Russians. And this is the point that Morris makes. It would have been far greater importance and motivation to Seth Rich, who was seriously upset about how Bernie Sanders was being treated. He would have been the one that would have had the greatest motivation. He would have been the one that would have had the direct access. And if we believe everything that the Forensicator has stated, as well as other IT techs who've looked at his analysis, it becomes pretty clear that Seth Rich was almost certainly the person who would have leaked those emails. And so that's just an observation by Dick Morris, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. If you look at the content of the emails and what they were about, it's a lot more likely that would have been a motivator to Seth Rich than it would have been to any Russians. And of course, we know that we have Cy Hirsch, Julian Assange, we have Gary Carter, we have the CIA station chief, the Russian intel officer, the fact that the DNC would not let the FBI look at their servers. We have even the original Guccifer, even saying that it was likely not the Russians and was most certainly other people doing something to make it look like Russians. That's the original Guccifer, who's in jail right now serving 7 years. The original Guccifer, not Guccifer 2.0. So we have all these other sources and looking at this, and it's even William Binney, who was the architect of the NSA spying program, the technical part of it, even he's out there saying the same thing. So this is very interesting by Dick Morris, a very good observation, and I think just more proof that when you look at the content of what the emails and what the emails were about, it's something that would have been far more of interest to Seth Rich than it would have been to the Russians. So just a good observation by Dick Morris. So credit him for that. And so I think that, again, back to the original question, I think it is strange that we see the Russian narrative collapse, and as soon as we see the Russian narrative collapse, now it's not Russia anymore. Now it's Trump and nationalists, Trump and the KKK, Trump and Hitler, Trump and the Nazis. It's just one thing to the other. It's just too convenient And of course, we know who's behind a lot of this. Yes, we do, folks. We know who's behind a lot of this. It's a Hungarian man who just had a birthday, who's got a lot of money wrapped up in these groups, who has a track record of starting these color revolutions. It looks a lot like exactly what we see going on here, the fight being promoted by George Soros in Europe. Those fights there and in North Africa look a lot like the fight that he's now promoting here in the U.S. Fortunately, I think there's just too few in number of these people to do anything but cause a nuisance. So I don't worry about the situation going to what it went to in Syria or Ukraine or anything like that. But certainly it just throws more of a hindrance into the affairs of the country and the president's efforts to try to do good things and move the country forward. So it's I think it's pretty obvious what's going on here. I don't think we need to speculate any further. But anyway, that's my thoughts for today, Sunday, TowerGate, day 168, August 20th, 2017. Thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to being back with you tomorrow evening, and we'll see what happens next. Thank you for tuning in. Bye.